Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and if you're a frequent viewer of L'Chaim, you know that one of the things we enjoy doing most is introducing you to the incredible men and women who are helping to shape Jewish life today and indeed impact the Jewish future. And lucky, lucky me, I have the chance to sit with an extraordinary woman who has made and is continuing to make an invaluable contribution to Jewish life today. I am thrilled to introduce you to Rabbi Joy Levitt, who currently serves as the executive director of the JCC of Manhattan, which has become one of the most exciting and vibrant cultural institutions, not only in New York City, but of all Jewish America. Let me tell you a little bit about Joy Levitt. Joy received her smicha from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical School and actually became the first woman rabbi to serve as the president of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical Association. After serving many years as a congregational rabbi, Joy has devoted an enormous amount of her intellect and passion and time to developing educational initiatives. And Joy is the founder of the Jewish Journey Project, which offers an alternative to synagogue religious schools and Talmud Torahs by creating a program in which a coalition of synagogues have their students participate in a program in which they have the opportunity to choose from a menu of educational electives, which is led by educators in various locations. You should also know that Joy is married to Rabbi Michael Strassfeld, who's been serving as rabbi of the SAJ, the Society for the Advancement of Judaism, which happens to be the synagogue where I became a bar mitzvah and where my grandson Aaron will become a bar mitzvah in a year or so. And of course, the SAJ on West 86th Street was created by Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, the founder of the Reconstructionist movement. And in honor of her outstanding work, Joy has been recognized by Newsweek magazine as being one of the 50 most influential rabbis in America. And Joy, it is wonderful having you at this table.
Thank you very much. Here.
Thank you for joining us. I want to talk a lot about how you view Jewish life, but I first want to understand how you become you. And, you know, there are so many ways in which our lives overlap. You went to Barnard, I was at Columbia. But where did you grow up?
I grew up in a small town in Suffolk County, Long Island, which called Centerport. Very few Jews.
Did you have siblings?
I have an older brother who lives in Watertown, Massachusetts, and a younger sister who has joined me on the Upper West Side of Manhattan.
That's lovely. Now, you know, what was the nature, the character, the tone of your Jewish home your parents created for you?
You know, I would say what makes me me is my parents.
Yes. What are their names?
My dad died a couple of years ago,
sorry.
Jean, and Shirley is my mom, and she's going to be 86 in February and still going strong.
Good for her.
They raised all of us with a sense that we had a responsibility to our community and to the larger world, and I think they lived that. They were both very, very active. My dad in the synagogue, my mom with National Council of Jewish Women, ultimately with Huntington Hospital and other organizations that just, you know, they were just never home, but always working on behalf of the community.
So they were models for you in many
Absolutely.
ways. Yes. It's amazing how that works. Did you celebrate Shabbat as a kid?
Yeah, we belong to the Huntington Jewish Center, which is a conservative synagogue on Long Island, and we celebrated holidays and Shabbat, and were active. I was particularly active in synagogue. I guess I was probably the most active. My dad and I used to go to services together on Friday nights, and I used to go to junior congregation on Shabbat mornings, and then I went to Camp Ramah, which I would say was probably very formative for me.
USY?
USY.
Okay. Then you go to Barnard, And at some point...
And it all tanked.
At some
you know,
point,
it was the 60s and 70s. It was hard to find my place, and
Is that true?
For me, it was. I mean, there were plenty of people that were involved in the joint program or involved at the seminary, but for me, I was doing the rebellion thing, I think, from Jewish life, which is easy to do in Manhattan because you're there anyway in the water. So, when it came time for me to decide what to do with my life, the rabbi of the synagogue where I grew up was very active, particularly in the civil rights movement.
Who was this?
His name was Lloyd Tenenbaum, Alav HaShalom. And he was a real model for me of an activist rabbi. And I thought that's what rabbis did. I thought rabbis marched in Selma and integrated neighborhoods, and I wanted to do that. So I walked up to, actually this is a true story, I walked up to the Jewish Theological Seminary to get an application. This was in 1974. And the woman looked at me like I had been beamed in from another planet because women were not being ordained by JTS at that time. And that's what led me to the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College.
Very interesting. You know, the class I was ordained with was a class of Sally Presant, who was the first woman to be ordained by the Reform movement. And you're right, at that time, women were not accepted at JTS. And I remember what an enormous brouhaha it was when women tried, and the committee that deals with this issue considered it, rejected it. The outcry was extraordinary from the laity, and they ultimately reversed themselves. But are you saying to me, in essence, you think you would have become a conservative rabbi if you had been there, let's say, 7, 8, 10 years later?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'd come out of the conservative movement. As it turns out, I belonged, I think, at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College.
Why?
And it was a good place for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was open, it was new, it was fresh, and I think it gave me one of the most important tools in my ongoing work, not only in the synagogue, but particularly in the JCC, which is a very deep respect for members of the community who are not clergy, right? There's not this hierarchical structure
Absolutely right.
that says the rabbi knows everything and lay leaders know nothing, right? There's a different kind of focus, and I've found that really helpful. Because in my particular work, the community is the expert at what I do.
Mm-hmm. You serve a congregation for a while.
20 years.
20 years. And why does that end?
I loved congregational work.
Did you?
And I love synagogues. I'm not just saying that because I love my husband, who I love. Religious language really speaks to me. That being said, I'm not sure it speaks to everybody. In fact, I'm quite sure, at least as it's currently constructed, it does not. And I wanted to explore what less denominationally focused, more pluralistic, wide open Jewish life might be. And I feel now, particularly now, that JCC's, at least our JCC, is really where the Jews are. 3,000 people walk into my building every day.
Really?
Uh-huh. And
oh, it is an amazing place.
It is.
What you have done is amazing.
Well, I mean, that's very kind of you, but I have a staff of 150 full-time people, and it's really what they've done. We are interested in shaping 21st century Jewish life, and that's going to look very different, right? 20th century Jewish life was all about boundaries and walls and who's in and who's out. That's over, at least for the non-Orthodox community. In the Orthodox community, those boundaries are still being built, and in some cases higher. But in the non-Orthodox world, we don't have them anymore. So the deep question is, how do we stay authentic to Jewish life, radiate out Jewish values, have such confidence in our product Jewish life, Judaism, that it will survive the test of an open society? Those are the questions I want to be asking with both my staff and our community, and that's what I get to do every day.
I love it so much. How do you end up at the JCC of Manhattan?
So when I was deciding to look for a larger canvas, I did a kind of informational tour with a lot of different people, and one of those people was Debbie Hirschman, who I went to college with. We both went to Barnard together. She was actually president of the undergrad, and I was the editor of the yearbook. And she was at the very beginning of this JCC, and she hired me to be the program director.
And that's where you started?
That's where I started 15 years ago.
When David was there?
David.
Who was the exec?
Debbie Hirschman was the executive director. She hired me. She left 2 years later. David came in for about 2.5 years, right. and then for the last 8 years, I've been the executive director.
Okay. Has it been fun? Because I would imagine it's also an enormous amount of work.
You know, there used to be a, what was that expression, velvet handcuffs? Or that great dessert in the New York, on New York menus in the 80s called Death by Chocolate. It's a tremendous responsibility, right? This feeling that what we do really matters, right? And I don't mean just the program. I mean how you're greeted at the door, how we notice, how we name you, right? New York is a very big city, and our job is to make a very small village of it, a shtetl, if you will, right? So that people feel cared for, they feel known, and we listen to them, and we're able to meet their needs. So that responsibility has given me, you know, some neck problems. I don't think I've had a full night's sleep in 8 years. But that being said, who else gets to go to work every day with an extraordinary group of people who ask these very important questions? How can we be helpful? How can we meet this person's need? What can we do to advance Jewish education? How many people get to go to work and say to a board, I really want to blow up Hebrew school? It's unacceptable in our times with so much affluence and influence that we should have such a bad technology for delivering such a great product, and have your board say, go take a 3-month sabbatical and figure it out. Mm-hmm. You know, so
how
yeah,
lucky are
I'm
you?
having fun.
That is wonderful. I very much want to hear you talk about the educational aspect and how you view it. And I also want to understand how the Jewish Journey Project evolves. What did it grow out of? When does it occur to you? Why is it?
When I was a congregational rabbi, in addition to my responsibilities, I also ran these schools or oversaw these schools. And I think I was a pretty good rabbi. And I think the schools were not as good as they could have been. And no matter what I did, I couldn't figure it out. And I remember a moment, it was probably 30 years ago, when one of the kids in my Hebrew school was throwing chairs out the window. You know, it's 4:30 on a Tuesday afternoon. What else are you going to do, right? So I had to call his mother, and I say to his mother, look, you know, Stephen cannot throw the chair out the window. And she said, Stephen has ADHD, and I medicate him for it during the day, but he really doesn't want to take the medication after school, and I really don't want to give it to him, and after all, Hebrew school isn't real school. So this is a long time ago. I didn't 100% even know what ADHD was, but out of my mouth came the words, look, you can either give your kid medication and have him come to Hebrew school, or you can't come to Hebrew school. So on some level, the Jewish Journey Project is a tikkun, is a repair of that awful thing I said to that parent. How dare I say, you do it my way, instead of how can I help you? And in truth, while for special needs children, Hebrew school really doesn't work, the fact of the matter is that we now know that many children have different learning styles, and we all know that 4 o'clock on a Tuesday just isn't a good time for many, many children. And so I remained very frustrated by it. When I came to the JCC, there was some pressure on me to create a Hebrew school at the JCC, but it didn't, you know, I knew that my 4 o'clock at the JCC wasn't any different than the 4 o'clock at the shul down the street, so why could I do it better? And I was given this sabbatical by my board, and largely because my husband was having a sabbatical and I wanted to join him. And I was talking with a friend and worried, like, what do you do with 3 months? Like, I'd never not worked. I was actually terrified that I would just waste the whole 3 months. So she said to me, I want you to think about what you think in this third of your career, the ending third of your career. What will you be embarrassed about if you haven't made a real effort? And it was just clear to me that if I could do something about Hebrew school, that's what I wanted to do. So I wrote, we did a lot of focus groups on sabbatical. I wrote a white paper. We sent it out. We got some money. And we did a planning process for a year with 6 synagogues and the JCC. And that white paper got changed and some cases made better. And then we launched. We got philanthropic support, which was required, to test the notion that if we actually provided excellence, then parents would be willing to pay for it. Jury's still out on that.
Very honest.
But what we learned and have continued to learn is that there are essentially 4 pillars on which excellence in Jewish education rests: flexibility, innovation, collaboration, and community. Everything wrong with Hebrew school, quite honestly, can be understood just by the title, right? Hebrew and school, right? So number one, no one can teach Hebrew at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 hours a week. I mean, we can teach decoding. We don't do it very well. It's all in the pursuit of the bar mitzvah. It's not about love of language. Everything we know about learning language says immersive works. This is the opposite of that, right? So, yet we still call it Hebrew school. And school's the other one, right? As though school was how we got children connected to their tradition, to their values, right? Like if the outcome we want to achieve is a robust Jewish community, I'm just not convinced school's the right model. And so we kind of turned that up on its end and started exploring ways to innovate and make things flexible. Turns out Saturday night's a great time to offer Jewish Journey classes. 10-year-olds don't have that much to do. Parents want their kids out of the house. They're wide awake. You can do a lot that communicate. Krav Maga, an Israeli martial arts class that we do only in Hebrew. So all of it's in Hebrew, and kids are learning the language by osmosis. Now, they're not learning the language, but they're hearing Hebrew. They're having a good time. They're moving their bodies. But we're also taking 5 texts that talk about Jewish strength, right? Whether that's Samson or Pirkei Avot or other texts in the Talmud that talk about strength, and helping these kids who are obviously interested in strength not just experience that in their bodies, but also in their minds. We'll have a cooking class, for example, where we've got 10 10-year-olds and 5 older adults, seniors in their 80s from Dorot on the Upper West Side that works with elderly Jews. And they have a chef educator who is doing Jewish holidays with them through cooking. But so much more is happening there, right? These seniors are talking about what it was like to grow up in Shtetlach in Eastern Europe and where there was not that much food and how they made a cholent, and then they're making a vegetarian cholent, so it's like a twist. So we start with saying to the child, what do you love? The child says, I love cooking. We marry that passion to something Jewish, and out comes not only an association with what I love is also something Jewish, but knife skills, right? So we have communicated to parents that this has value added in multiple different ways. A child says, I love photography. So we happen to have a class in which we teach the morning blessings, Birkot HaShachar, and then we give kids cameras, and they go out into the city, and they take photographs that manifest those blessings that they just learned. Go show me where God gives clothes to the naked. So they may show a homeless shelter. You know, go show me where God gives strength to the weary. They may show somebody on a video offering a seat to an older adult on the subway. And what happens there? They take their love of photography. They've just learned a piece of liturgy. And most importantly, they've been able to understand the theology of that prayer in a way that they would, I think, never learn just by learning it by rote and sitting in a synagogue service. And hopefully, when they go to that synagogue service now, that prayer actually speaks to them.
So, number one, it's brilliant.
Thank you.
And of all the things you said, I'll tell you what resonates most with me. I ask them what they love. And I try to work from that starting point. I don't believe Jewish education has ever had that model. And look, we both became rabbis in the 70s. I've heard this since the 19th, before I became a rabbi. I'm hearing religious school is terrible, after school is terrible, Talmud, whatever it is. The day school experience is a different experience, but that's not what you and I are talking about right now. How do you take the kid who's spent a day in public school and then say Tuesdays and Thursdays and Sundays you'll come and we'll somehow
make you a Jew.
Yes.
Right.
And I want to share with you my problem with it, and then I want to hear what you have to say. I argue that most of the time the adult world, whether it's parents or rabbis, have decided that there is a body of information they want to impart to a 10, 11, 12 person becoming 13. And we know that one of the problems is so often once they become bar mitzvah and have their service, they're out the door. So it's almost as if there's this desperate attempt to pump into this child information. And I have always felt that it was very artificial because it didn't speak to anything the child cared about. Right. It's hard enough, by the way, in public school, telling a child, you're now going to learn ancient history. We want to teach you European history. We want to teach you, chemistry. And very often a kid will say, well, why do I need this? It's all the more so when I want to teach a child who the Rambam was and who Joseph Caro was. And I sometimes feel adults want to teach their children what they as adults wish they knew. Mm-hmm. But they wish it as an adult. Mm-hmm. It's never what they wished for as a child, right? And therefore, so much of the Talmud Torah after school, Hebrew school, I love your point. The idea that I took French 5 days a week for years in high school. I can't speak French. We're going to teach kids a language in 2 afternoons or a Sunday. Are you out of your mind? Again, the day school experience is a totally different environment. But we're going to teach kids after school Hebrew. And my own goal here when I teach, all I want to do is make them comfortable with Hebrew they may hear in the experience of Judaism that's in their lives. Well,
look, I think we can actually do quite a lot with Hebrew. I'm not of the camp that's given up on Hebrew. I think language is incredibly important for a whole host of reasons. But we got to do that much earlier than most Hebrew schools start. And I think we ought to be watching very carefully what the Hebrew charter schools are doing, because there's immersive Hebrew going on there at 5, 6, 7 years old. And where I think we've got a huge opportunity, particularly JCCs, is in summer camp.
Absolutely right. It's a different experience.
And we are now looking at what Camp 365 looks like, which is to say our kids are in camp for 8 weeks in the summer for 5, 6 hours a day. Enormous opportunity to do Hebrew. The way you learn a language, which is orally, right? In Hebrew schools, the first thing you learn is writing, and in reading. Actually, it's reading, writing.
Correct.
The way you learn a language is by listening.
Correct.
Right? So if camp is full of that language, the singing, the music, the ruach, all of that, and you're learning that, and then your after-school experience when you go home reinforces that in basketball, in swimming, in acting, in music, whatever it is that you're doing. Then it's a language. Then it's a language. Right?
But
then by the time you get to the Jewish Journey Project, you can choose a variety of different things.
Yeah, but you've changed the model much earlier.
That's right.
Did you go to Talmud Torah type situation?
I certainly did.
Okay, and they taught you how to, quote, read Hebrew?
I did. Tried.
Okay. My own experience is, both in terms of my experience personally and everybody I've seen, the expression to read Hebrew is really not what we're doing. We're taught to phonetically pronounce
decoding.
Hebrew.
We're decoding. Right.
We learn a shin makes a sh sound.
That's right.
Okay, and a tet makes a t sound. But most people, most adults, when they read in a prayer book, they can't tell you what they're saying.
Right.
Okay.
Here's part of the challenge also, is that those same adults that can't tell you very much often will say to me, I really want my kid to feel comfortable in a synagogue wherever he might find himself in the world.
They're right.
Sure. And then you say, do you go to synagogue?
Right.
And they say, absolutely not, right? So the problem here is, like, your children are most likely to feel comfortable with the things that you feel comfortable with. That's what modeling is, to get us back to the beginning of our conversation, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I can do it, but if you don't value it, you've said, why is it that most Jewish children know how to read English? Because their parents read. They see it. It's not just, right? They see a utilitarian value to it. They see a spiritual value to it. Their parents do it. They do it. If you don't have that, it's very, very hard to do.
So I'm thinking to myself as people listen to you, and you say, okay, so there's a class in which you ask kids, do you like to cook? You like photography? Do you want to learn martial arts in a Hebrew setting? And I understand there is value to that because you're beginning with where the child is. I'm not teaching the child something I want to know as an adult, and therefore I'm going to teach this kid because I'm not going to go, but he's going to go for me. At the same time, I can hear somebody saying to you, but Joy, you're not teaching them. You're not teaching them.
Where's the meat?
Yeah, but yes.
Let's take your grandson, for example.
Okay.
Right? So when you have really smart kids, and this is another real problem with Hebrew school, right? They know right away that when you're wasting their time. And there's a whole segment of our population of kids that are incredibly busy and they don't like to cook and they don't like martial arts, and that all looks like fluff. I want to argue it's not, because the messages that we're sending to kids is Judaism can be what you love. But for a certain set of cerebral kids who really want to, right, the great advantage of the Jewish Journey Project is we partner, for instance, with Machon Hadar in a kind of Beit Midrash program where kids are learning Talmud, right? There are classes in Bible there, and as the program gets bigger, we've got more and more opportunities because you've got more kids that say, I want that. And by the way, I think it's fully appropriate for parents to say to, like one parent said to me, I want my kid to do something serious, but you give him that big catalog and he sees all these fun classes and I can't get him to take the serious stuff.
But what's a serious class in their mind?
Well, so that's a different question, but hold on to that. And then I say, well, do you give him ice cream for dinner? Like you're a parent, say this is what you have to do. Like, that's okay, that's your job, right? And that's all of our jobs. So oftentimes what parents mean, what are they really getting at? They want their kids to have a deep understanding of what Jewish holidays are.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
Well, I'll tell you what it really means.
How many adults do you know
what does it really
who have
mean?
a real
Now, come
understanding?
on. You know, Mark, what it means. What it really means is that at the Passover Seder, when the kid does the 4 questions, we don't want him to embarrass us in front of our parents. That's what it really means, right? So there's a set of things, Hanukkah blessings, bar mitzvah, right? That's the key, right? Bar mitzvah is this unbelievable elephant in the living room around Jewish education. So never mind that 90% of what happens in Hebrew school has nothing to do with bar mitzvah. Those children are being tutored by a tutor every week for 6 months or 9 months or a year, and they are learning what they have to do for bar mitzvah. And if they never went to Hebrew school, or they went 3 days a week, the program for that tutoring is exactly the same. And what we say to them is, we're going to ask you to perform. We're going to give you something hard to do. By the way, it's not that hard. You're going to do it, and you're going to feel phenomenal on that day. You're going to feel powerful. You're going to feel successful. Your parents are going to watch you, and all of that's fabulous. The problem is the thing we give them to do, which is haftarah, the prophetic works. Very hard to understand Isaiah, right? Particularly if you're studying with a Hebrew teacher, and it's taken out of context. So you've got 12, 15, 22 verses. You don't know what it means. Very hard to understand. It's beautiful. By the way, the prophets are beautiful. And if you're 16 or 25, you should study them. But when you're 12 and 13, really hard to have that, there are a few that are really, really good and really work. Anyway, we're spending most of our time not even working on what these prophets are saying, but how they're going to sing it. So we're giving them a trup. 6 months after their bar mitzvah, they won't know it. They won't remember anything that happened in that period. They will remember that feeling of power that morning, so that's great.
Absolutely right.
But couldn't we do better? Isn't there a way to...
It's very hard. You have described the conundrum of Jewish life, but you've done it so perfectly. Incidentally, neither you nor I, for all of our disappointment with the classic Hebrew school, Talmud Torah, after school, I still believe there is enormous value in a child doing something.
No question.
At his bar mitzvah.
So,
and by the way, there should be every child doesn't have to do the same thing.
So I'm playing around with a new model. This will be the first time anybody hears it. We just did it once with one of my fabulous board members who said, I got to do this a different way. And she said a lot of things to me over the years. We got to do this a different way, and we did, and much of the good stuff at the JCC is because of her. So we spent a long time thinking about what bar mitzvah really means. And I said, look, I think what really happens at bar mitzvah, should happen, is that child should be logging on to the Jewish people. When he takes his talis or she takes her talis and puts it on that scroll, she's basically saying, this is my story. I'm in it. I'm committed to it.
Could you have done that at 13?
So the question is, what does that mean? So here's what we did. We had a mincha, an afternoon service at her home There were only 15 people there. And her son, who didn't have a Hebrew school background or know how to read Hebrew at that point, had an aliyah. He was called to the Torah as a bar mitzvah, which, by the way, is what the Talmud says, right? The Talmud doesn't say you have to go to Hebrew school for 5 years. The Talmud says when you turn 13, you're a bar mitzvah.
Exactly right.
You're right. So the question I asked him, David, was, let's talk about how we can strengthen your muscles this year to be worth something to the Jewish people and to feel that you can get something from the Jewish people, because that's what it means to be an adult in our community, to take responsibility. So each month for the coming year, he's taken on a different assignment for himself. And we used Pirkei Avot al Shlosha Devarim ha'olam omed, on 3 things the world stands, on Torah, on Avodah, which were sort of spirituality, worship, and Gemilut Chesed, right, on acts of righteousness, loving kindness. So last week he went to Cuba on a UJA mission with other kids who became bar mitzvah in the recent past, and his father, to learn about the Jews of Cuba. So this was sort of on this issue of, they were doing a service project in Cuba with the Cuban Jewish community. Next month he's going to Poland. He's going to Auschwitz, and he's going to the new museum in Warsaw that describes the life of Polish Jewry. In March, he's studying the book of the book of Esther with me, because he doesn't believe in God. And that's the one book that doesn't talk about God, and he wants to understand and spend some time talking with me about theology and his theology and emerging theology. 1 month, he's going to spend a week with his grandfather, who's a philanthropist, understanding business ethics and what philanthropy is all about. He is going to learn how to blow shofar in September so that he can be useful to the community. He's going to build a sukkah in his parents' backyard in October. He's going to volunteer at a local community center on the Upper West Side at Thanksgiving time. He's going to study the commandment, honor thy mother and father, around Father's Day with his parents as a family education. Each month, he's going to do a different activity that strengthens his Jewish muscles for being a bar mitzvah. Now, is this a model for everybody? I don't know. But I think it's going to be a really interesting journey for him.
This is a typical kid or a very unusual kid?
I don't even know what a typical kid looks like.
You don't? That's not fair. You know what I mean. It sounds to me like this is a very unusual child.
What I would say, it's not a typical family, right?
Right.
It's a family that's extraordinarily thoughtful about their Jewish life.
Right. The model he's seeing is already a very different model than some of the other parental models you've quoted here.
That's true. I mean, by the way, his father, until 2 years ago, wasn't Jewish, and decided to convert after his oldest daughter had already had her bat mitzvah, and his wife had had a bat mitzvah, right? So this is a family that is on a journey themselves. So right. Yes, that's different. That being said, could we create Camp 365 with the Jewish Journey Project, have bar mitzvah truly be the beginning of your Jewish education, and you then commit to 13 activities that...
It's a lovely idea.
Right?
It's a lovely idea.
And what would that look like?
It's a lovely idea. I don't know how easy it would be to replicate.
I don't either.
You may find individual children for whom this works very, very well. It sounds exciting to me. I'm saying to myself, is this something that I could see replicating on any kind of mass scale?
It's hard because I mean, look, it's hard partly because, you got tutors that know what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to teach mapach, pashta, munach, et nachta. They know what to do, right? So the problem is, how do you find something that can be scaled that's actually meaningful? That's the
very hard,
challenge.
Right. I don't know if you meant to say this or whether, again, it comes out of our mouths, not your mouth, our mouth.
Yeah.
A child at 13 is not an adult.
Right.
No rabbi and no parent should ever burden the child with that
Correct.
notion. And a lot of what you appreciate now and you articulate it so magnificently, I don't believe would have come out of your mouth as a 12-year-old. And I continue to come back to this notion that your sensitivity and your insight now has been a product of your life experience, most of which was an adult.
You know,
it wasn't in the first 12 years of your life.
True, but I will say that when I was 12, I have total recall on this memory. The cantor of our synagogue handed out those booklets that had all of everybody's Haftarah.
Absolutely, we
right?
all remember them.
And I opened my booklet, and I had a Haftarah that had 7 verses. Now, I was the smartest kid in Hebrew school. I went to Camp Ramah. But I had no idea how Haftarot were picked. So I raised my hand and I said, I can't believe I'm saying this on television. I said, there must be a mistake. You know, that jerk over there has a 22 verse. I need a big Haftarah. Why are you doing this? So the teacher said, it's not a mistake. Your bat mitzvah is November 11th, and this is the Haftarah for November 11th. And I had a meltdown. So they sent me to the cantor. So I explained that there must be a mistake, and he tried to explain it. By this point, I was hysterical, so they sent me to the rabbi. So the rabbi, explained to me that the Torah portion is coordinated with the Haftarah, and that, he speaks, he gives his sermon on that Torah portion, so the Haftarah has to be coordinated. And I said to him, Rabbi Tenenbaum, I'm reading a Haftarah on Friday night, which you've already made up, because Haftarahs are not read on Friday night. So first of all, you've already made that up. Second of all, you don't read Torah on Friday night. So I think you could figure this out. And I was only 12, and he gave me a different Haftarah. Now, so I would suggest, first of all, I think kids are older now than they used to be on some level. But how we treat them at that point, how we listen to them, how we encourage them, and how we raise the bar for them is probably really important for their long-term Jewish journey. But you're quite right that they are not adults, and we shouldn't be saying they are.
Right. You were not a typical 12-year-old. Most kids who saw they only had 7 verses
would applaud.
Would be thrilled.
Yes, that's true.
Also, when you say you could read, do you mean read or you could pronounce?
I could pronounce. I mean, look.
So it wasn't, and for you, there was a certain sense of, wait a minute, I know enough. I can do this. I want to.
It was mostly ego.
That's right. It was ego. It was, and I don't mean this pejoratively. You wanted to show off.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And you should mean it pejoratively. That's what it was.
But I don't think it is pejorative. I think that would make you proud, and you wanted to show what you were capable of doing. I'm sorry, I applaud that. But it's not typical.
Probably not.
And therefore, it doesn't help me understand this. When I talk to my kids, the students that I work with, and I explain to them, I said, do you understand why you're becoming a bar mitzvah? Why are you doing this service? Why are you doing this service? I am convinced, although there's a you're very unique. Every now and then you get a kid who somehow loves it intrinsically.
Right.
They're not typical.
Right.
Okay. Most kids, they're doing it for one reason. Or let me put it this way. I want them to do it for one reason. It's a gift. What you're doing is an extraordinary gift to your parents, and if you're fortunate enough to have grandparents, your grandparents. That's why you're doing it. None of them are doing it for themselves. And they're not doing it for the presence of the party. It isn't real enough yet. All they're looking at is this body of stuff they're basically going to have to learn somehow by rote to one degree or another.
Right.
Why do you do this? And if they can understand that when they do this, it's a gift, it changes the way they approach it.
I think that's beautiful.
Isn't it nice?
Yeah.
And my own feeling is that somehow, you know, I can't tell you how impressed I am with the way in which I come back to this phrase, you are thinking like nobody else is thinking. The problem you're dealing with is a problem you've seen discussed in Jewish life from before you were a rabbi. And you're doing your best to come up with real alternatives that come out of the child's place, not imposed upon the child by adults. And that's what you're doing at the JCC in general. And, you know, I don't mean to embarrass you, and the audience understands what I'm saying. You see all kinds of people come at this table, and they're all making unique contributions. The chidush here, the extraordinary innovation of Joy Levitt, and I mean this in the most complimentary way I can, is it has to do with a frame of reference that you bring to everything you've done as a rabbi and now that you're doing at the JCC. And your frame of reference is you begin with the person.
That's right.
And so often, rabbis who are but they all start out most of them start out very well-meaning. The system tends to tear rabbis apart. Very often, how many synagogues do you know which say, if you want to, it's what you said to that kid that you're now atoning for, you're doing teshuvah for, but it's said by so many rabbis, you want to become bar mitzvah here? 4 years. We want your money for 4 years.
Look,
the fact that this child becomes a bar mitzvah, nobody gets bar mitzvah.
Right.
You become a bar mitzvah by doing what? By drawing your first breath on your 13th birthday. This is an entitlement. The genius of the Jewish tradition is we say, at this moment when something is happening to you, but it's also happening to your body, we're going to give you, in a Jewish context, an extraordinary moment of experience. And we should do it your way. We should then take every child and try to figure out how can we, from the child's perspective, give them a moment that will last forever and have on top of it a Jewish overlay that will in some way bind them to the Jewish people.
A lot of the training at the JCC starts with this notion that everyone is created in the image of God. So if you believe that, then it matters how that person is treated from the minute they walk in. Every good thing we've done starts because somebody has said to me, we need help here, right? So I got a call 15 years ago from a parent who said, what is this new JCC that's being built going to do for my 2 children who are on the autistic spectrum? Honestly, 15 years ago, I hardly knew what that meant. So I could have said, we only have 7 people on staff right now, call me later. I could have said nothing, that would have been the truth at that time. But my training and the atmosphere of the JCC at that time and to this day was, you know what, why don't you get some friends and come in and tell me what you need? A week later, there were 60 people in this rented space we had, all of whom had children on the spectrum. And out of that came the Jack and Shirley Silver Center for Special Needs. Because we listened, we learned, we thought about what we had capacity to do. This is an unbelievably expensive proposition because you really need high quality staff. We have a stupendous director who runs this program. But it didn't happen because Joy Levitt sat in an office and thought, ooh, I think it's time for us to do. No. It happens because somebody knocks on the door and we open it.
Also, I only want to say this because I don't want the audience to misunderstand what I'm saying. I believe it's wonderful for a child to be able to have a familiarity with the 4 questions and the blessings for the candles on Hanukkah and Shabbat, and be able to know the Shema, and Hebrew is the music of the Jewish ear. I want even if they don't know what they're saying, I do want them to have phonetic Hebrew.
And we do too. And by the way, you could do that in a week.
That's right. Good for you.
Right?
Right.
Now, I got 10 fingers, right? So we use 2 of them for that. Now what are we going to do with the other 8?
Exactly.
You're
and that's
totally
what,
right.
Right, and that's what you're trying to figure out. Okay. take one step half back here. I now want to know, as Joy Levitt looks not at the education of children, which we spent a lot of time on, nor specifically the program that you've created at the JCC. You saw Pew. You know what people are saying everywhere they go. What at the moment concerns you most about where American Jewish life is today, which you hope either evolves or moves in a different direction?
Last night at the JCC, we had the first meeting of a teen board. We decided, it wasn't me, it was our chair who thought this would be a great idea. She's got a lot of teenagers in her house and she thinks they're smarter than she is. And we wanted to figure out how to harness the energy and wisdom of teenagers to have an impact on the JCC and its future. And one of the hard, challenging things that some of the kids said to us was, this feels exclusive to our friends, right? We have non-Jewish friends, we have all kinds of friends, and you know, we come here all the time and do all this great stuff, but when we say it's Jewish, they say, well, then I shouldn't come, right, because I'm not Jewish. So I heard that post-Pew, right, particularly around this number bandied about, which is either 75% of non-Orthodox Jews are going to marry non-Jews, or 80% of Reform Jews. However you slice it, this isn't a number we like. And Pew is descriptive, it's not prescriptive, right? If you looked at if Pew had happened in the 1950s, it would have said orthodoxy is going to decline, the conservative movement is going to reign. Well, that didn't happen, right? So the opposite. So we don't know what's going to happen. That being said, what is happening is that increasing numbers of people who weren't born Jewish are coming into our community. And how we welcome them and how we embrace them and to what? What are we welcoming them into is going to matter in a huge way. So the newest initiative on the part of the JCC is thinking deeply about that question. So some of it is, very few people convert. I don't know the numbers, but it's under 2,000 people a year. And when you talk to people about conversion, they often will say, I don't believe in God, so what does it mean to convert? Because they somehow think all Jews believe in God. Newsflash, not so much, but, that's that. And they often will say, it's kind of a tribe you guys have, right? So how do I can't really get in. And frequently, the Jewish partner isn't advocating, right? Because we don't encourage people to convert, which is, I think, probably a big mistake. And finally, these conversion programs are uneven. Some are excellent, some are mediocre, some are terrible. My sister-in-law just converted to Judaism. She took a class offered by the Board of Rabbis in her city, and the second week they took them to the supermarket to learn how to read labels. She has a PhD and a law degree, and she said to me, and keeps a kosher home, by the way. She said to me, this is the best you got? Couldn't we have some real conversation about? So I think there's work to do in those classes. But what the biggest takeaway that I have is that we have to create communities within the community of interfaith couples with couples that are endogamous, Jewish families, small chavurot, where we take some of the principles we've learned from the Jewish Journey Project and we give them an advisor and we say, go do something. You want to do Tikkun Olam for the year? Gegezint. You want to study Talmud? Also fine. You want to do Shabbat and holidays together as a group? Great. And we're going to give you a peer educator, somebody that will help guide you, a tour guide for Jewish life, as it were. Not a teacher who's saying, this is what you have to know. This is Judaism 101. By the way, for many people, that will be fine, and we should do those classes. We should do them well. We do them wonderfully at the JCC. But for others, providing community for interfaith couples where they can go on the journey accompanied, I think is going to be an important new effort for the JCC.
And so, Joy, if you were asked for your, if you could determine Jewish social policy in the non-Orthodox community in America, would you encourage rabbis to be present at an intermarriage?
So I had a congregant once who said, you got to learn the difference between a spaghetti issue and a meatball issue. A spaghetti issue tangles you up and it doesn't have any protein. And for 20 years when I was in the Congregational Rabbinate, that question tangled us up and had no protein. And I'll tell you why. If you open the New York Times vows section today, what you'll notice is that there are large numbers of people getting married, and they're not calling rabbis. They're calling their friends who are universal life ministers for the day. So while rabbis have been fighting, and I respect the fight, I mean, I respect the rabbis who think that they shouldn't do it. I respect the rabbis that think that they should do it. It doesn't matter anymore. Rabbis who choose not to do interfaith weddings will simply not do those weddings, but those people are not getting married. They're all going to get married. So every rabbi's got to say, do I want to be in this couple's life, and at what point, right? So for some rabbis, that point's got to be after the wedding because they can't do it for their own reasons, which I respect. But if they think that they're saying, I'm not doing this wedding, it's going to have a significant impact on the intermarriage rate, I think the numbers prove otherwise.
You're absolutely right, but I didn't hear what you would do.
So a week after 9/11, I was asked to do a memorial service for one of the companies who had lost a lot of people. I didn't know the family. It was a Jewish family, but I didn't know them. About a year later, I got a call from one of the sisters saying, my sister is about to get married to somebody who's not Jewish. Would you do the wedding? And at the time I said, look, I don't do intermarriages, but the truth is I don't do weddings that much anymore. And she said, well, will you talk to them? And of course I was going to talk to them. And to your earlier point, were they a typical family? This was a philanthropic family where the dad had been on the board of an Israel organization. The bride had spent a lot of time in Israel. The groom had done a 20-week program in conversion, was not ready to convert. So no, it wasn't typical. But at the end of the hour, I couldn't figure out why I wasn't doing this wedding.
Very honest.
And I did it.
Really?
And guess what? Nothing bad happened.
You survived?
More importantly, they had 3 children. I did both brisses, not the circumcision part, that was a mole, and the baby naming. 2 of the kids were at a Jewish day school. One of them still is at a Jewish day school. They're actively involved in the JCC on multiple levels and living a rich Jewish life. Now, by the way, whether I had done the wedding or not done the wedding, I'd like to think that was true because that's who they are and that's what they wanted.
I agree with you 100%.
They've traveled to Israel with me. So I think that there are circumstances in which it makes a lot of sense to help a family on the journey at that point. And if I was not, running all these other things and I had a lot of free time, I think that there's probably no more sacred work than taking these couples and helping them think about their Jewish journey and being their guide along the way.
Joy, that's lovely. And what would you do if a gay couple both of whom were Jewish, came to you and said, would you be the Messiah?
Oh, that's not an issue.
It's not an issue at all, is it?
No. I mean, I've done plenty of gay weddings. I wouldn't even hesitate.
That is where the Jewish world is today, is it not?
I mean, you know, what do they say in economics, right? We're not in a seller's market. We're in a buyer's market. And I
But
mean,
that's not why you do it.
I'm
you do it because
so
you believe
moved.
it's right.
Absolutely. I'm so moved. Anytime somebody walks into my office and says, help me lead a Jewish life, I got to be there, one way or another. And by the way, I believe that my colleagues who don't do these weddings feel exactly the same way. I don't think that anybody feels like these decisions, well, I mean, certainly in the non-Orthodox world, I think that everybody recognizes that it's if it ever was the case that people wanted out of the Jewish life when they intermarried, it's certainly not the case now. Most of the people that we talk to, whether we're doing these weddings or we're not, want in Jewish life, and that's our job.
You know, you are dealing with New York, basically New York Jewry. When you leave New York, it's a very different picture. And I get mail, Joy, all over the country, and I'll talk to people who say to me, there does not seem to be an understanding inside the New York Jewish world of what life is like in Seattle, a congregation there, where almost everybody in the congregation, a large congregation, is intermarried.
Right.
And there has to be a recognition and appreciation that Jewish life, especially outside of major urban centers, it has a different quality. And everything you're saying is, again, we must respond to people, yes?
And also, I think it starts with a sense of confidence. If we believe in our product, let's call our product Jewish life, and Judaism and Jewish tradition, if we believe in it, then we don't have to clutch it. We can open it, right? We can say, come try it. We can say, actually, Jewish tradition is going to, Jewish practice, Jewish life is going to make your life better, right? Not you have a responsibility to your parents, your grandparents, the Holocaust. By the way, I think that. But the way that this is going to expand is when we're able to say, your life is going to be improved by Shabbat. Shabbat is good for you. It's also good for the Jewish people. But it's good for you to put that iPhone down for 24 hours. Try it. After you get the shakes for a little while, you're going to feel better.
You're fabulous.
Thank you
are
so much.
Fabulous. But I want you to invite people who are watching right now all over the New York area, and there are people watching all over the country, but if they come to New York, they should also stop by. I want you to invite them and just give us just a taste of some of the programs that excite you, that you'd love to share.
So I'd love for anyone who's watching today to join us at the JCC. If you're around on Shabbat, on Saturdays from 2 to 5, you can walk into the JCC. It's free. We have programs all over the building, just designed for you. You don't have to be a member. You can be from out of town. You could even be from the east side of New York. You should check out our website, www.jccmanhattan.org, where you'll find enormously interesting programs for every age and stage of life, including interesting conversations in the evening, programs for your health, for your body, for your soul, and for your mind. And every Tuesday night, there's a film at the JCC. You can also check out the IsraelFilmCenter.org, where you can stream virtually any Israeli film, download it onto your computer, and watch it through the IsraelFilmCenter.org.
Yasher Koach, by the way, from strength to strength, called Tuva
Thank
Hatzlachan, all you do. But I will only let you go if we put a semicolon here. You'll come back and continue. My conversation with Rabbi Joy Levitt, this extraordinary creative executive director of the JCC of Manhattan. And again, you've got an invitation now. You should stop by and sample what they have there. It's an extraordinary, extraordinary building, and maybe you'll see joy there as well. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to anything either Joy or I said. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.